This video will demonstrate how to graph and find best fit equations using Microsoft Excel. The example I'm going to use would be a constant velocity vehicle. So I'm going to put my time in the column A, and I'll just put a SEC for seconds to keep that in mind, and then I'll put a position, and we'll say it's in centimeters in column B. Now this is going to give me a position versus time or distance versus time graph. We want to put our X values in column A and our Y values in column B. So suppose we measured this every second up to 10 seconds. At 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And suppose these were my positions. It started at the origin, and then at the 21 centimeter mark, 43, 61, 84, 99, 120, 139, 161, 178, and 199. So I put my data in columns A and B, and now I want to make a graph. I'm going to left click and highlight that data, and then the way I like to do this, of course there's more than one way to do this, but I'm going to say insert a graph, and we want to do scatter plots. Scatter plots just graph the points, the dots, that they're not connected. So once I graph that, here it is. I'm going to make that bigger so you can see it better. So you can see along the X or horizontal axis I have my 0 to 12. Those are my times, and on the Y axis, the vertical, I have 0 up to 200 or so. Those are my positions. So I know I haven't reversed the two columns. I really don't need that series box unless perhaps I'm graphing more than one thing on the same grid. So I'll click on it and just delete it. Now in this graph I want to make it look like a graph. It needs to be labeled. I need more grid lines. I need a title. So I'm going to go up here on Chart Tools to Layout, and I can say Grid Lines. I can say give me the major and minor horizontal, and then major and minor vertical. So now I've made it look a lot more like graph paper. I want to put in a chart title, and you have your options there, but I'm going to call it position versus time. Hit enter, and there it is. Now I need to label each axis. You should always label the axes, and they should have units included. So my horizontal axis, that's my time, and that's in seconds, so I'll put time comma S, and my vertical axis is position comma centimeters. So now I've labeled my horizontal and vertical axes. The title of your graph most commonly will be the y-axis versus the x-axis. So being instructed to make a graph of position versus time tells us that position is on the y and time is on the x. That's the way they're titled. Now in order to get the best fit equation for this data, I've got a couple of options to do this, but the way I like to do it is just to right click on one of the data points, and it gives me the option to add a trend line. Now I have to look at the shape of that graph and determine which trend line I want to add. Well, linear is the default, and this does appear to be linear, but sometimes the graph is curving, so if you're doing quadratics, you choose polynomial second order, and that would give you the curve of a parabola. We'll also be doing some graphs where occasionally there's exponential or power curves. Now in addition to adding that trend line, I want to display the equation on the chart. No point in getting an equation with that if you don't display it on the chart. And I'm going to display this r squared value on the chart. For a linear equation, the r squared value being close to 1 tells you it's a good linear fit, or -1 if the graph goes downward. So that gives us a way of knowing how well that equation fits our data. So when I tell it to close, I now have that equation y equals slope x plus y-intercept listed. And it gives me an r squared value of 0.9994, which is pretty decent. Now I can drag that equation up there where it shows up better, or I can click on that, right click, and where it says Format Trendline Label, I can change my numbers or fonts, so I can fill it with solid white, and when I do that and I move it over the graph, it shows up without the grid lines being on there. Now, in order to print a full page graph, you have to select the graph. You click on the graph and go File, Print, and it will print a full page graph. If you don't do that, if you've clicked somewhere else and you go File, Print, it prints the Excel screen. So your data and then the graph is cut off, and this shows up in 2 pages. So if you want to print your graph full screen, you select the graph and hit print. Now I can also copy this graph, and I can go into a Word document. Let me just do that. New Word document. And I can paste that graph into my Word document. You'll be asked to do this in some of your labs that you report. And I can also take that and I can rotate it. So having it full page rotated is very useful too. So that's how you graph with Microsoft Excel. It is a skill that you will use throughout your whole career. So it's important to learn how to graph with Microsoft Excel.